capitalism isn't a sinister model of sort of tyrannical control. It is very, very much a responsive and simple-minded creature, much in the way a dog is a responsive and simple-minded creature. It is entirely and perfectly attuned to what you want and what you need. But when we anthropomorphize it, when we give it this agency, this power over us, just like when you anthropomorphize your dog, you encourage bad behavior because it considers itself your equal, and it will do things that you don't want it to do and that are necessarily bad for you in the end because it doesn't recognize that that is a cost to you. You don't, or you may not realize that you're instigating that behavior, but it does so anyway. But if you take that framework away and recognize that it is a system that is responsive, that is subservient, and dependent on us, then you can begin to train it the way a healthy owner-pet relationship should be manifested. Is capitalism really capable of meeting the development of the sustainable energy technology? What is energy? We use energy to describe a lot of different characteristics. We use it to describe biological interactions within ourselves. It's heat that we produce. It takes energy to run. You feel low energy, but energy is also an industrial complex. It's the electricity that runs through our walls. It's the fuels that we put into our cars. It's even the sort of cosmic energies that run the universe, the energy of the sun, the energy of the galaxies. And we use it to mean all these things, and we use it synonymously with words like power and fuel and vitality. So when I'm talking about energy, I'm talking about a specific set of physical phenomena. And when we're talking about energy industrially, we're usually talking about these sets here, which are heat, momentum, electricity, light, sound, and nuclear radiation. And then forces are a set of phenomena that interact with energies. And these all interact in order to create sort of the energy-based ecosystem that we use today. When we look at industrial energy, the goal is to take these energy forms that are available to us in nature and make use of them by breaking them down into the energies that are most useful to us. So biologically, the most useful energies to us are momentum, heat, and light. Our most effective tool as a species is our ability to take forms of energy and store them for later use, and also our ability to take one form of energy and transfer it into another. This is a diagram that shows how each energy form can be turned into each other, and how each of them can also be turned into electricity. And electricity is useful not because it has any biological resource for us as living beings, but because it alone can become any of these three forms. It has zero mass. There's no fuel that needs to be transported, and there's no necessary limit to the distance that it can travel. In industrialized energy, you start with heat and end with heat, but you use this complex system of energy exchange to allow it to happen. This is significant because of two basic laws of physics and energy. The first is the conservation of energy, which says that energy is never created or destroyed. It's only ever transferred from one type to another, from one place to another, or into or out of a form of matter. There's always the same amount of energy. It only goes across an area and disperses or coalesces into potential energy. At the same time, and conversely, no energy transfer is ever perfectly efficient. So if I want to take heat and turn it into momentum using pressure, I always lose some energy along the way, as light, as sound, as radiation, as all kinds of things. And the more times that you jump from one energy type to another, the more points you introduce to allow energy to be lost. So capitalism is a system that seeks to expand and to grow. It's very simple. The rules state that if you can make a profit by doing something, then you should. And if you can make more profit by doing more of it, then you should. And if you can make more profit doing something else entirely instead of the thing that you are already doing, you should. The only limitations occur when you introduce rules of value, which are stipulated by us. We decide what profit is, what costs are, and what the ultimate value and the goal of that growth is. Capitalism has given rise to a few standards of the economy: commoditization, industrialization, and globalization. Commoditization basically means if I want something, I can pay for it rather than having to produce it myself. And everything becomes commoditized. I don't have to build my own house, I don't have to engineer my own car, and I don't have to drill my own fuel to run that car. I can buy all of these things with a unit of exchange. And every process of production and every job that each individual has becomes specialized and allows us to create careers. Industrialization is the process of commoditization. You take a product that you want, or a service, or a method of transfer or exchange, and you break it down into increments of productivity. Give each person a different job that they repeat over and over and over again, and you create this streamlined process and increase dramatically the efficiency of that group of people. Globalization is the effect of non-industrialized countries inserting themselves into an industrial system because of their desire for the commodities that that industry produces. But in order to get those things from the westernized country, they have to be able to offer something that the westernized country wants. So they introduce jobs and industries of a westernized style in their own country in order to give themselves an ability to make that exchange. And that's how globalization happens. In some sense, it's a great thing. The competition makes prices lower for consumers, which is always a goal of neoclassical economics, and it gives these countries access to the goods that they want. But at the same time, it limits the ability of countries to differentiate themselves from each other. It devalues traditional ways of life and traditional cultures of citizens in that country. Total GDP of these countries has changed. This is only from the 1960s, but at a huge trajectory and sort of, I mean, some countries like Germany have increased more slowly, but we know from today that they still are doing very well. Things like personal computers, and this is again from only the 1990s, have increased dramatically. Access to cell phones has increased. I mean, it has become an existent thing at all. So all of the resources that we need to feed and prosper with a population of 8 billion versus 1 billion have come from a capitalist and competitive model. But there are negative effects as well. The most important of these are the energy crises, which are global warming, national debt, waning energy resources, and nuclear proliferation. And I picked these four because in the worst case scenario of each of these, they cause the certain downfall of the US and or moreover the globalized market and global society. All four of these also are exacerbated directly from different energy resources that are evaluated more positively in the public-private model that I introduced earlier. So global warming, its primary exacerbator is the use of coal. National debt and waning energy resources refer to petroleum, and nuclear proliferation refers to nuclear energy. So what the energy crises are reflecting that the private-public model isn't is the existence of externalities. And externalities is a term that we use in economics to describe costs that aren't associated in the initial production and consumption of a product. So when I buy a product from something, I'm paying for a certain list of prices or a certain list of costs that that company or that manufacturer, that provider has incurred. But anything that isn't included in that price tag that I may incur later on or somebody else may incur later on would be considered an externality. And so this diagram expresses how those costs are broken down. Traditionally, for a cost analysis for a company making a product, they use fixed costs and variable costs. Fixed costs are all of the costs that you pay from the beginning in order to start manufacture, and variable costs are all the costs that you incur incrementally along the way. So in order to account for externalities, you can look at the public-private model and introduce new forms of evaluation. You can replace rivalry and excludability with with sustainability and renewability in order to account for these externalities. When you talk about a sustainable system or a sustainable resource, what you're specifically talking about is from birth to death or from production to consumption of a product. Along that way or along that full circle, you should not end up with a huge loss of a certain product or excess of another one. So a system is sustainable if along the means of production you have minimal loss of a certain resource and you produce a very minimal amount of byproducts. Like minimal to the sense that they are not impactive to the environment in any significant way. So in this case, I have the fixed costs and the variable costs simplified down to a subset. The limiting factors that I introduced originally, and then the externalities that are most associated with those energy resources that aren't included in a traditional evaluation of cost. This is an initial sort of idea, a way of breaking into that energy market and accounting for externalities. You can see here that on the side we have degrees of action and degrees of response. Degrees of action pro-sustainability or sort of passivity towards sustainability, and the potential necessity for that action or not. And in the top left corner, we have a really great outcome, and the bottom left, we have global disaster and shape of human society changed forever. If we just let the system choose its own way of evaluation by letting externalities express their costs in a non-monetary way while continuing to just consider cost analysis on a traditional way, we'll end up somewhere on this map. Is capitalism appropriately equipped to develop a sustainable energy future? I think that it's clear that the data would suggest that the answer is no. The data would suggest that because it relies on the system of public-private goods and the way that value is created through that system, it's not equipped to consider the values associated with sustainability. But at the same time, we have to recognize that capitalism is responsive to what we define as individuals, as communities, and as a society, what costs are and what value is. It does its best at every point to give everybody what they want or what it thinks that we want, while also trying to maintain profit and maintain growth. What my division has really shown me in the end is that the issue isn't capitalism at all, but it is these externalities. And it's this idea that we can produce and consume resources and think that there is such a thing as a cost or a result that doesn't affect us in the long run, or that doesn't necessarily matter, or that we don't have to pay for or put on the price tag. It is that specific framework of thought, both in production and high-scale industrialization and individual consumer basis when you buy something, that has allowed these energy crises to occur, as well as other issues associated with equality, public security, national defense, and access to resources around the entire globe. And that is the conclusion of my paper.